a very warm welcome to everyone that's attending this morning. Thank you very much for taking your time out and coming along. Firstly, I will introduce the team. So I'm Natalie. I am one of the business development managers at Amicus. I'm also joined by my colleague, Lisa Mahoney, who is our lead growth marketer, and she'll be helping out with the logistics this morning. And of course, our CEO and founder, Callum Murray, who will be taking us through most of the agenda today. So today we're going to be talking about what the LSAG guidance means for you in light of the recent updates, how Amicus as a technology platform can help, and also we'll be doing a quickfire Q&A just at the end. Any housekeeping, so the session will be recorded. If you have any questions throughout, please do feel free to pop them in the chat box at the bottom, and we can address as many as we can during the Q&A. Any that don't get answered, we'll follow up by email. Likewise, if you'd like to unmute yourself during the Q&A, we'd welcome you answering the questions live. So now I will pass you over to Callum without further ado.
Thanks, Natalie. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm going to take you through the regulations and update. We've been approached by quite a number of clients asking various different questions, so it felt like it made sense for us to put a panel session together, be able to answer the most common queries and then cover them off, and you can follow up. We'll also share all the links afterwards, so anything that we reference throughout, we'll share on. There's also a Q&A that we've got with Graham McKenzie, who's head of the AML team at the Law Society in Scotland. And so we'll follow up with that too once that's been published, and we'll share that out. So broadly speaking, this change and update, it came out maybe 8 or 10 weeks ago now, and it's applicable across the UK, regardless of whoever your supervisor is, if you're working in the legal profession. So positive bit of news that actually things are aligned across different areas, and the guidance has been significantly updated. There's around 200 pages worth of it. It's actually quite digestible, easy for me to say, but it does take a bit of time to go through. But the way that they've pulled it together, it's pretty coherent. It's far clearer than you will have seen guidance in the past, and it's actually pretty useful. So what we're going to do is just take you through the kind of top 3 things that have come in from support questions and queries, things that have come to us. We also, in some occasions, field questions to the Law Society in Scotland, so we've got a good working relationship with them, the SRA and others. So if there is something that comes up that you would like us to pass on and you maybe feel a bit uncomfortable going back to them direct to query, then by all means you can ask us, and we'll be happy to be a conduit to do that. One of the most important things is to think about getting the right appropriate people in your firm together, whether you are a high street firm with a couple of people, or potentially if you're a sole practitioner, setting aside some time to review what policies, controls and procedures you have in place today and how you might want to adapt those, so when it does come up to your next inspection, you feel like you're in hand, you're on top of things, you know what's going to be expected. So getting the right people together and thinking what's applicable for you. If you're a larger firm with a bigger corporate structure, you might have multi-offices, you're going to have your MLRO and your MLCO, as well as an AML team, potentially a risk function that might manage these things centrally. So getting everyone together and understanding where you are today is obviously an important first step. Getting in a good look at the guidance too, we'll share a link out to it. And as I've said, it's pretty straightforward. It takes a wee bit of time to go through. But the way that they've split it out, there are now 36 key principles, and they've broken the whole bit of guidance down in that approach. So you can see across those different policies, controls and procedures, what areas you would need to focus on and think about. Most areas you probably have in place so far. One of the first kind of big bits is around your approach to people. So the AML certification process is ongoing at the moment. The deadline for that's the end of the month. I'm sure everyone's already well aware of it. And that's really around pulling together the last year of information that you've had that relates to new clients and transactions and what kind of risk is posed based on your client base and activity. So understanding what's actually gone on over the last year is going to be important. You need to report that back. And as part of that, you've got an update to say who are the beneficial owners, officers or managers. So if that's changed, if you've maybe had new people promoted to partner level, or you've got new people involved in the firm, maybe you've merged, maybe there's been some sort of M&A activity, thinking again about who you should be reporting back to the Law Society is going to be important. So you will have had the opportunity to provide an update and share who those people are. Within sections 4.6 and 8, that really breaks down what's required, and Natalie will talk a little bit about that later on when we talk about staff vetting. The other big obvious point is the firm-wide risk assessments. I would expect most firms now have that. So it's really thought as a starting point. So what do you know overall across the firm? And then it would narrow down if you've got a client-specific risk assessment as well as a matter-specific risk assessment, and how you manage that and understand what kind of level of risk is posed to your firm, whether it's, you know, a cash business, a large cash transaction. It could be geographical risk. There are various different factors to think about. And if you've got that firm-wide risk assessment, you really understand the appetite overall as to the type of client that you're going to be dealing with or interacting with, and then what necessary controls you've got in place to reduce that risk, and in many cases accept the risk, but acknowledge that you've put steps in place to reduce what might have caused a problem, or, you know, what might be something that would be of concern but has since been treated. So making sure that that firm-wide risk assessment is in hand and you've got it up to date is one of the first things to be thinking about, in line with the new guidance that's been provided. Evidencing that approach to risk is also something that's called out specifically in the new guidance. So thinking about how you're documenting the decisions that you make and how you're going to track that, whether it's, in some cases, it may be a paralegal or someone who's on a front line kind of admin function engaging with a client. The partner or person responsible might be a couple of steps removed from that. So thinking about how you're linking the client due diligence process or the client intake process alongside risk assessments back to fee earners, and who's actually taking responsibility. So there's a section in there that talks about the obligations of the money laundering reporting officer and how that then flows down into people who are actually working and dealing with clients in the front line. Linked to that, pretty similar to the stuff I've really just been talking about, for your new assessment of risk and client risk assessments, there's a section there to go into more specifically in section 5, and it talks in much more detail about what you would be expected to do there. It's something that's been mentioned in the past. It's certainly something that's been on the radar for the different regulators, but it's now far more specific. This second point is something that we hear fairly regularly, that you might know Mr. or Mrs. Smith and they live locally and they've bought a property with you before, or, you know, the type of transaction that they are doing is deemed as low risk. So in effect, you've decided not to complete a client due diligence process. This section 6.2 now specifically calls out to say that that's not going to be plausible going forward, and that regardless of how well you might have a personal relationship with this individual, you should still be collecting the relevant documentation, corroborating that information and understanding what level of risk is posed by this individual. So in the case if it is Mr. Smith and you've known Mr. Smith, still making sure that you're going to review that information, document that in a client-specific risk assessment, and then when it comes down the track to say, well, you know, you applied simplified approach to the due diligence process, that could be validated and you have actually done some of the work there and collected some information, and you might well have repeated it if it's been, you know, a year or a couple of years since you've last engaged. But it's important to now recognise that saying that you've got a relationship and if it's not documented, that's not going to fly anymore. Third point there about source of funds and source of wealth. There's quite a big chunk now in this guidance about technology and you understanding what the technology might do, like what, you know, is it actually providing you? If you've got a big green tick, what does that really mean? You should understand the underlying information, where it's come from, what that would actually mean in line when you look at you know, a photo ID document linked back to an identity query. You should understand what the technology is doing and what is it providing you with. So there's a a good section in there around predominantly at section 7 that goes into a lot more detail. And the other aspect of it saying that there's now more of an encouraged approach to using technology, where in the past it might have been a bit more fleeting or a kind of glancing suggestion that technology is a good thing. It's now called out, and we've had a couple of instances where in particular it's been flagged to say this has been a really good thing. And the example of pulling back bank transaction data directly from banks as opposed to relying on an uploaded PDF, that's been something that's been acknowledged as a real positive moving forward. Thinking about when something's not quite right, it's the kind of sniff test of it. Doesn't look right, it doesn't smell right, it probably isn't. A couple of things that have come up now. One of the ones that's maybe been a bit more contentious is about company's house discrepancy. So as and when you're dealing with an organisation or some other entity and there's a change in beneficial ownership, or there's maybe a director changes in part of the transaction between one point and the next, you've now got an obligation to report that to Companies House. They've got a little tool, there's a small kind of widget that you can use to do it. It's actually really simple to do. It's quite easy to find as well, and we can share a link to that. But there's now an obligation that if the circumstances of a company has changed since you last worked with them, it might not be unusual. Maybe it's just par for the course, and potentially the client that you're working with just hasn't updated Companies House yet, or they have and it's just not reflected online. But you've now got an obligation to flag that up to say, you know, is there something unusual, something has changed. Second point here about team review and monitoring, Natalie will talk about a bit more about. So calling out the boom process of running a disclosure check against senior people, there's now an obligation to do that for frontline people who are handling identity information or linked to the anti-money laundering process. So a bit more thought about who these people might be. Are they subject potentially to bribery, or is there any potential link that they might have to organised crime? Again, you might think not really realistic for your firm and your scenario, but it is something that we've seen in the past, and there's been a couple of instances in the last couple of years where there have been a couple of fraudsters been involved and tried to pull off commercial property transactions, that type of thing. They've been picked up and flagged, but you know, you're talking about, we run about 30,000 transactions or checks a month, and you're maybe in a handful that might be queried, and over an annual basis there might be from that a handful that actually are something that is worth looking at. I'm not aware of particularly an instance where there's been a challenge internally of someone pulling out information or sharing that information, something that's happened with larger financial services firms, but it's not something I've been aware of within the legal profession, although we work across sectors. So something that's been added in here, I think maybe more an abundance of caution than anything else, but thinking a bit more about who are the team who are actually handling this information, what can they do, and do you really kind of monitor their progress, or has anything changed in their circumstance? The last point here is a bit odd, but it's something that's been specifically called out in the guidance, which is to write things down. And it seems from feedback that there's a lot of people would have anecdotal discussion about why a client might be accepted or why a transaction has gone ahead, but there's not been an audit trail of that internal decision-making process, which would make perfect sense, but without it being written down when it comes back to an inspection, can lead to more questions, or perhaps a few more kind of raised eyebrows than would need to have happened if it had been written down. So section 10 is definitely worth a read, something worth getting a good look at. So that's a bit of a whistle-stop tour. There's obviously, like I mentioned, 200 odd pages of the new guidance. I would urge you all to go away and have a look at it. It is available across all the different regulators who do have it all published. We'll share some links. But from a practical perspective, I will pass across to Natalie and she can share a bit more about how we can actually help out day to day.
That's great. Thank you very much, Callum. And that was really helpful. It's really interesting. So now we're going to look at how Amicus can help you become compliant with the guidance and work towards the guidance. I'm just going to run through a quick overview for anyone of Amicus, for anyone that's not really familiar with the platform, and then we'll do a kind of deeper dive into the really juicy stuff. For any of our existing clients on the call today, it might be that your firm is using Amicus, but there are some bits and pieces that you aren't using that would be really beneficial for you, or would help towards you working towards that guidance. Likewise, for any firms that don't already use the platform today, we'll touch upon how the platform can support you going forward. Amicus is the market-leading compliance platform for legal and conveyancing firms, enabling you to verify and onboard new clients and staff fully remotely. The last year has seen an enormous shift in how people work, and we've been well placed to help organisations maintain or improve their compliance processes on a fully remote basis. Not only will using technology give you peace of mind that you're meeting regulators' expectations, but it also provides you and your clients or staff with a much more secure and convenient process. For you, transactions will be much faster, workloads will reduce drastically, and you'll create less non-billable hours. And for your clients, they'll no longer need to take time out of their day to come into your office or be forced to send sensitive information over email, which puts them at risk of a data breach. It's not a secure way of transferring information. So how does it work then? The platform links to a wide range of data sources to allow you to verify home addresses, document legitimacy, complete enhanced due diligence, which is PEPs, sanctions, and adverse media, verify banking information, credit checks, financial credit checks, and criminal record checks. You can also transfer any sensitive information and documentation between yourselves and your clients or staff securely. It also comes along with an automated audit trail, which documents every step in the process. Overall, it makes for a much smoother and more secure end-to-end onboarding process. So if you need to carry out checks on a client or a member of staff, all you need to do is open up the Amicus dashboard, which you can access via your browser, and begin your request for information or documentation by entering the person's name and their email address. You can customize this request to your needs by selecting the checks that you need to carry out. When you sign up to Amicus, we will work with you to preload your account with what we call request templates. This means that you can select a template from the drop-down list and it will pre-fill the page with the correct checks and document actions. This saves so much time and it keeps your compliance processes consistent for every client or staff member. You can also add a personalized message to accompany the request and set up reminders so that your clients and staff members are notified every 2 days that they're yet to complete the request. This again saves you time and hassle in continuously chasing them up to complete that information. Once you click send request, the request is sent by email, which will contain a link to your secure platform. It doesn't require your clients or staff to download an app, which can be a bit of a nuisance for people, as you can imagine. They can securely submit their documentation and any information from any personal device at any time that's convenient for them. Amicus also provides an alternative option for those who may not have access to email or are unable to use the system for whatever reason. You can simply open a link and complete it with your client in person in the office. And this means that every client, regardless of their age, situation, or technical ability, has their data treated with the same rigor, respect, and security as others. And once submitted, the verification process is instantaneous, so the results come back straight away. You'll then be notified by email within your Amicus account, and results are ready for internal review and any follow-up actions. So let's talk about how Amicus can help you meet the requirements within the new updated guidance. I mentioned previously that you're able to set up templates of pre-filled checks and actions to make sure you're completing the correct checks consistently. But here's how request templates might look in your Amicus account. I'm going to show you how these can actually help you. Firstly, let's talk about staff checks that Callum mentioned. He spoke about the obligation to continuously vet your booms, which are beneficial owners, managers, officers, but also any frontline staff that are directly involved with AML and compliance and processing that information. So talking about BOOMs specifically, here's an example of a request template set up specifically to check and verify any of your BOOMs, internal BOOMs. Amicus covers everything required to ensure that you're compliant here. So as you can see from the slide, that includes a basic disclosure check. So it's a basic basic disclosure Scotland check, which is a criminal record check. You've also got a photo ID check, electronic photo ID check, and then you're also able to request that they send you a proof of address document. So just in a few clicks, you can have all of that set up and ready to send over to your member of staff. Let's talk now about your frontline AML staff, who are, again, directly involved in handling that compliance information. So as you can see from the slide here, you're able to choose all of the different checks and actions that are actually outlined in the guidance. Once you have a look through, you'll see them all. So you can see here, you're able to run a Disclosure Scotland check, the criminal record check, also a financial credit check, watch list check, which is your PEP sanctions adverse media, ongoing monitoring, which is really important, ID verification, so identifying who they are and their addresses, verify their address. You're also able to really quickly and easily gather previous reference contact details and information of up to 10 years of pre-employment history. You're able to send across any documents and any contracts securely, and you're also able to gather any other information you need. So it might be that you need their proof of qualifications, for example. That tends to be really important. So let's move on to KYC and the importance of knowing your clients and evidencing that as well. Callum mentioned the requirement from regulators to complete client due diligence on every single client, even if you know them personally or they're local to the firm. This can create a very awkward situation or scenario, particularly if the person you know is having to take time out of their day to drop documents off at your office, or if you put their data at risk of breach by sending over insecure email. You can take much better care of their data by using Amicus, which is doubly encrypted, and it will be a much more convenient and quick process for them, given they can complete the checks in minutes at a time that suits from their personal device. So it can be done at home, in a cafe, at the park, wherever they want to complete it, they can do it really easily. You can have a template available for this very purpose. So you can just see on the slide again, in a few clicks, you can send a request for an identity report, photo ID check, watch list and monitoring, which are really the kind of standard suite of checks that you should be running on everyone. So let's move on to source of funds and source of wealth. The guidance goes into detail on how using technology to support your source of funds and source of wealth processes can provide a much quicker, more accurate and more robust checking process. Our new banking information check enables you to securely verify balances, transactions, payees, income, and affordability in minutes. You can create a faster and more convenient process for you and your clients, where you'll no longer be asking your clients to go into their bank branch to print off bank statements for them to then scan them up and send them across to you. We use FCA regulated open banking technology to obtain client banking information, keeping your clients' data as safe as possible. And there's no more time wasted chasing bank statements again or searching for transactions via loads of different paper documents. So how does it work? You can tailor the request to your needs. You can verify account balances, transaction history, transaction amounts, account ownership, income, and affordability. Using the custom link sent in the request email, your client will arrive at a secure portal and they'll be directed to their banking provider, where they'll log into their online banking to provide access to the requested data. The person who has shared their information with you is in control of what data they share and can revoke at any point in the process. The bank login credentials are never shared with us or any other third party, which is really important. And then the results come back and they're really, really easy to review. You can filter them by transaction type, date, debits and credits, etc. And that information is kept in your Amicus account for as long as you want it to be kept there. Finally, let's move on to risk assessments and also this idea of the need to write down and document your compliance information. So the risk assessment, so custom forms are a feature built into Amicus, which enable you to either gather custom information from your clients or staff. So a good example of this is maybe your client's bank account details or their national insurance number, for example. But custom forms can also be built to use internally within the firm as your new matter or new client risk assessment forms. And to be clear, you should be completing that on for every new client and every new matter as well. You should be completing a new form. Going back to the updated guidance, which refers to the requirement to carry out an internal risk assessment form on, as I said, all new clients and matters, you can really quickly complete and store this within Amicus next to the client results, any other documentation, and their internal audit trail, which you can see on the home screen there on the slide. The final point that Callum spoke about again is the requirement to evidence and document the decisions that you make when it comes to either onboarding a staff member or deciding whether you want to instruct a client. So all clients or staff information is automatically stored in Amicus, and that includes any results, any documents that have been transferred, and also any custom forms. All that information is stored next to your internal risk assessment forms, which you can complete at any point. And also, as I mentioned, the sort of automated audit trail. So every step in the process is date and time stamped, and you're able to add notes to the audit trail as and when you need to. Something else to think about is when it comes to the firm being audited, you can actually add the auditor as a read-only user into your Amicus account, and they can come on and see every single one of your clients' compliance files really easily, and also the audit trails as well. And then you're able to disable their access once they're finished. So it saves you muddling about in your paper archives and looking for all your clients' compliance information. So what we're going to do now is we're going to do a really quick fire Q&A, Callum and I. It'll last up to sort of 5 minutes. So let's double check if any questions have come into the chat. And likewise, please do feel free to unmute yourselves and ask away any questions. Okay, Callum, there's a question here around the banking information check. It says, for source of funds, do you still need to gather other information, for example, gifter letters, or does the banking information check cover that?
Yeah, it's a good question. So overall, the banking information check, we decided to go down that route as opposed to building out precisely source of funds and source of wealth, so slightly different things. So on the source of funds, what we're able to do is corroborate that information directly from the source. But to really manage source of funds, the requirement that the regulators will talk about is actually including also pulling back other information. So it might well show that Natalie's got £400,000 that's just been paid into her bank account by dad. Like, what's the reason for that? So you would be able to understand that there's a huge amount of money that has just been dropped into an account, and you could see that's, you know, a gifted deposit in inverted commas for you buying a new £1 million house. But there would need to then be the process of clarifying with the client, okay, where's it come from? Oh, someone's just won the lottery, or, you know, there would be the follow-up query of what's the actual questions. And as far as the gifting letter, that's something that's a good question. I'll go back to the Law Society on that one precisely, because, you know, should you need to do that, or actually the stuff that you would get in a letter could be just created into a custom form that you could create an Amicus to say, what are these questions? So you could have a standard range of questions, and they could do that all digitally, just filling it in when they're on their phone, as opposed to say, yeah, we do need this in a letter format, which I wouldn't think you would. The other way to do that would be if that was the requirement, which we'll double check and share around, would be you could capture that digitally using one of our checks to say, can you give us an upload? And you could pre-populate the question to say, go and give us your bank information, so the transaction data. And in that case, the first route would be, let's do it digitally, so it's really easy to filter and manage and it's simple for everyone. The fallback would be, if for some reason that wasn't possible, or the account coverage didn't cover it, or it's out with the UK, then you could do an upload. So I never really answered that question, but I think you could do it in a better, more automated way, just by creating the form, and you could then collate all that information. But yeah, I'll double check.
That's great. Thanks, Callum. I'm just looking at some more questions that have come through. Okay, a question here. We talk about Scotland. Can we also do criminal record checks in England?
Yeah, I think we've just mentioned Disclosure Scotland there, but we covered DBS as well. We're a registered body and a recognised organisation for them too. So if you've got your firm based across anywhere in the UK, we can cover that too. So the equivalent for DBS have a basic check that they do too. You're also able to do standard and enhanced with them all online. So regardless of where you are, or if your staff members are based across the UK, it's possible to do that.
That's great. And one last one is about enhanced due diligence. Should we be running enhanced due diligence on all clients?
In the guidance, so aside from this set of guidance and the previous one, the switching position was you would run enhanced unless you believe you should run a simplified one, rather than apply simple for everyone and then only apply enhanced when you think there's something that's potentially a higher risk. So you would want to justify, if you're going to run a simplified process, that could well be appropriate if it's, a low risk transaction as far as whatever your risk assessment said, then great. You can apply what you think is proportionate. But the way that the regulations or the guidance is updated is not so much guilty until proven innocent, but taking the approach that you should be thinking about why you wouldn't apply an enhanced approach rather than the other way around. And it's possible that, many firms potentially won't complete all of the aspects or, run ongoing monitoring, PIP sanctions and adverse media, but the guidance is now saying you should be running PIP and sanction checks against everyone, and that's very clear as well. So how you interpret what your overall enhanced approach is, typically it would involve the interrogation of the source of funds and source of wealth, dependent on the transaction. But that, again, it would come back to your risk assessment to say, well, what do you believe your standard or your simplified process should include, and what do you believe your enhanced process should include? And we'd be happy to share like what people do broadly, but ultimately you can make that call firm to firm.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Callum. There's one final question that's come through from Laura Kay, just asking if a recording of this session will be available, and absolutely it will be. We'll follow up at the end or afterwards later today, just with a recording of it. So before we finish up, I think that's all the questions we have time for. Certainly, if there's any other questions that we can think of, you can think of, then pop them in the chat and we can respond over email just afterwards. Be happy to do that. So before we finish up, I just want to mention that we will be hosting a follow-up webinar specifically going through the banking information, source of funds, source of wealth piece, and talking to you about the benefits, a little bit more about open banking, FCA approved technology, etc. So that's going to be on the 4th of May, and invitation details will be followed up with you all by email. We'll also email the recording of the webinar, as I said. Now, if anyone would like to book a follow-up meeting with myself, if you have any queries, if you'd like to, have a more in detailed chat about anything you've seen today, Lisa has put a link in the chat box, so you can book a meeting via that. We'll also forward the link by email as well. And as Callum mentioned, we plan to do a Q&A with Graham Mackenzie at the Law Society. So we will forward on the recording of that as well for anyone to watch over. For any of our existing clients that have attended today, please feel free to email support@amicus.co if you'd like to hear more about any of the checks we've discussed, maybe banking information, or maybe the staff onboarding checks, for example. Likewise, you can book a meeting with me. You're more than welcome via the link. And for anyone who isn't already an Amicus customer, you can book a follow-up meeting with myself, as I said, via the link, and we can have a more in-detail chat and go through things in more detail. Finally, I'd just like to say thank you very much to Lisa and Callum for helping out today, and also Callum for speaking. And thank you everyone who's taken time out your morning to come along. We really appreciate your time, and yeah, just thank you very much. Have a great day. Hope to speak to you all soon.
Thanks, Natalie. And remember, everyone, you can acknowledge this for your CPD points if you're trying to tot some up before the, the changing year. Thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you so much.
See ya.